And we're live. Good morning. I'm Sarah from TBA Law. I am here today to talk to you about first home ownership, the legal process, and what to do when you buy your first home. So as I said, my name's Sarah. I work here at TBA Law as one of the solicitors. There's two areas of law I practice in, one of them being property law. I have quite a lot of experience and have worked in it since I became a solicitor. I also practice family law, and they're my two areas of interest. So I was recently a first home owner myself. I bought a bit of land and built a house, so I have a little bit of experience and perhaps an empathetic ear to those people who are just buying their first home. I can appreciate it's a very daunting experience, and the idea of signing a legally binding contract for such a huge amount of money, which is probably at this point in your life the biggest purchase you'll ever make, is incredibly scary. So these are just going to be a couple of handy tips for buying your first home, as well as some stamp duty concessions and exemptions you're entitled to make that process a little bit easier. So jumping right in, firstly we're going to talk about the legal basics of buying your first home. So the process, getting money and that kind of stuff. So firstly, I guess it's all about finding a property. Now, most people buy a property through an agent. You don't have to, you can find it privately. Some people buy land off their parents, or they might know a neighbour selling a house or something like that. But agents are fantastic at helping you find a property, and when you approach an agent, you can actually give them a list of what you want and they can help you find that. There's also great websites like realestate.com and along those lines. Obviously, we don't help particularly with finding the property, but we can help in making sure the property suits your needs long term. So there are a few things to consider, which I will go into more depth in later. But something you want to do is, once you've found that dream property or that property that's going to be suitable for your first home, is to have someone review the sales documents. So firstly, you'll be given a contract of sale, and this is the document that governs the transaction. So it includes things like your names, the vendor's names, the agent's name, how much you're paying for the property, the deposit, whether it's conditional upon any other certain conditions, and also just how the transaction works through the process. The second document is what's called a vendor statement. You might hear it commonly referred to as a Section 32 as well. That's a document prepared by the vendor, and the purpose of that is to tell you all the information you should know about the property. So what the outgoings on the property are, like rates, easements and covenants on title, which we'll go into more depth later, the boundaries of the property, who currently owns the property, and also includes a due diligence checklist, which are things you should check. Now, when you look at these documents, they can be very long, they can be hundreds of pages if you're buying a property off the plan. So it's in a subdivision that hasn't titled yet, so you can't actually settle just yet. It can be, like I said, hundreds of pages. So it's always a good idea to get someone to review those documents for you. We just go through them and normally write a letter of advice. A good thing is to get any solicitor to do it. Some people charge for it. At our office, it's included in our set fee for the sale. So we can review that as part of our set fee. And the good thing is, if you don't proceed with the purchase, then we don't actually charge for the review of the contract. So it's a really great way to make sure that you're aware of what your obligations are, what all those big long terms mean and those clauses, and get the highlights without feeling too overwhelmed. A second big part of buying your first home is getting the money to buy your home. Obviously, it can be hard to get the money, and there are certain different ways you can go about it. So obviously you'll need a deposit. Deposits can vary from anything from $1,000 to 10% of the purchase price. 10% of the purchase price is normal, although some vendors will agree to less. It just depends, and that was something you'll have to negotiate with the agent. Banks often want you to have a full 20% deposit, even though 10% is listed on the contract, and you'll need to discuss your bank about this. If you're lucky enough to have all of the money there, that's great. That makes your life a little bit easier. The next option really is to have a bank involved, so the contract becomes subject to finance. So that means within a certain amount of days of signing the contract, you have to get formal loan approval from your bank. And this is most common in first homeowners, because first homeowners rarely have the equity in something else to buy a house outright. And so, like I said, you can go directly to a bank to get finance, or you can approach a broker. There are some great brokers around, and it's their job to help you find a good deal for your mortgage and get that process over the line. Another question we commonly get asked is, how much money do we need to settle? So obviously you'll need the full purchase price, which you pay 10% of or whatever at the start. But then there's a couple of little extras at the end. So perhaps you might have to pay stamp duty, and there are a lot of concessions for stamp duties available for first home buyers. So we will go into that more at the end of this video. You'll also need money for adjustments. So at settlement, the rates and outgoings on the property are adjusted. So let's say there's 365 days in the year and the vendor only owns it for, let's say, 150. Well, then you need to pay the extra 156. So you pay the vendor back and full rates are paid for the property. So you can usually expect a couple between 1,000 and 2,000 for adjustments. It can be a lot less. It just depends on what time of the year you buy and how much the outgoings are. What you'll also need is lodgement fees, and again, this is based on the value of your property. So you can expect from maybe $500 to all the way up to $3,000 for lodgement fees. There is some great calculators online that can help you figure out what those fees are going to be. The next stage is once it's reviewed and you've figured out all your funds, it's signing the contract, which, like I said, when I signed my first contract for my first home, I was terrified. And I'm sure a lot of first homeowners can appreciate the process. It is very daunting. There is a couple of things to know about contracts, and the first is conditional, like we just discussed. So it can be conditional on finance. It can also be conditional on other things. A common one, if you're buying a house that's already built, is a pest and building inspection. The common clause is that within 14 days of signing, you have the right to get a report from a certified pest inspector or building inspector. And if it shows any major defects or a major infestation, then you have the right to end the contract. We do recommend people get them on homes, especially older homes, just to protect yourself. It rarely comes to a point where you need to end the contract, but it might also raise a couple of little building defects perhaps that should be fixed prior to settlement. And you can include special conditions like that in the contract of sale if you can negotiate it with the vendor. If you buy a property privately, so not through auction, you do have a cooling off period, which is 3 business days. So within those 3 days, you do have the right to end the contract if you change your mind. If you do buy a property at auction or within 5 days of a public auction, you lose your right to cool off. So that's something to be aware of. Although most homes are sold privately, that's just a little provision in there to protect purchasers. Once you've signed the contract, you wait for it to become unconditional. If for some reason those conditions aren't met, then the contract falls over and any deposit you've paid is returned to you, provided it's ended on the basis of those conditions. So the next step is the bit where we really start to get involved and we start to prepare our forms. So there'll be a lot of stuff we'll throw at you and we're happy to walk you through the process. But common things are what's called a client authorization. So this is a document that allows us to sign the final transfer on your behalf. A verification of identity, as all property purchases are now conducted electronically. We need to have a document to say that we know you are who you are, and that protects both you, the vendor, and everyone involved. There is options to purchase title insurance, which is a way of protecting the boundaries of your property in case, let's say, for example, someone builds over a boundary or something like that, or perhaps the pegs are removed if you're buying a land off the plan. Once you get all those back, we start our stamp duty assessment. So this will be determining if you need to pay stamp duty, and like I said before, a lot of first homeowners either do not pay stamp duty or are entitled to a concession. But these forms need to be completed for settlement whether you are or are not paying stamp duty. And finally, we do the transfer itself, and this is on settlement day. So you may hear the word settlement thrown around a lot, and a lot of people get very excited because this is the day you physically get the keys. If you're buying a house that's already constructed. So it's the day you get the money is changed hands and you become the person listed on the title. You are the legal owner of the land, and you get to pick up those keys and move in. There are a couple of ways you can purchase a property. So you can purchase properties if there's 2 of you as a joint proprietor or a tenant in common. The difference between these 2 things is, so a joint proprietor means that you both share the one interest in the property, and you have an equal interest. So this means that if one person were to pass away, their share automatically passes to the other and vice versa. So it's very common for married couples to have that arrangement, or perhaps parents and children. The second way is called tenants in common, which is a little bit different, where you both have equal or unequal interests in the land, but they are separately registered interests. So you may have one share, your partner may have another share, and if one of you passes away, then your share in the property is dealt with in accordance with your will, and vice versa for the other person. So if they pass away, their share is dealt with in accordance with their will. This is a conversation we have with you, and we're more than happy to prepare it either way. It's a matter of determining what works best for you and your situation. All right, that's great. So that's a brief summary of the legal basics of buying a home. It's a very quick rundown, and I'm more than happy for anyone to contact me to go through it in more depth. Like I said, it's a very daunting process. Now the next step is really what to look out for when you're buying a home from a legal perspective. Obviously, you know what you want in your new home, whether it be some land to build a house on or whether it be a new house. The agents are there to help you. And the agents will help you find a house that suits perhaps your aesthetic needs or your needs for living at the time. We can help you review these houses to make sure that they suit your needs in terms of if you want to build on the land, if you can build on the land, if you want to run a business from the land, those kind of things, because there are certain restrictions. So common restrictions on land is an easement. So an easement is normally something under the land or over the land that is a protected right and someone always needs access to. So you'll see this a lot on new subdivisions. There's normally a water easement. The water easement is normally, it can be anywhere on the property, it can be along the front, along the back, but it's best advised that if you plan to build a house there, that you do not build across that easement. You can build across the easement, but you're going to have a lot of trouble if the water authority ever need to get to their drain pipes perhaps. To do that, they may have to remove some of your house. It's same for an existing dwelling. If you see a wonderful house and you think, wow, I want to put a shed in that back corner, we're able to tell you if there is an easement there or something there that's going to prevent you from building that shed. The next is covenants. So these are restrictions on developing land as well. These are normally things like, and common provisions of a covenant is perhaps that you can't use recycled materials or that you need to use a certain type of fencing. For existing houses, these aren't as relevant because the house is normally built, but it is particularly common on newer housing developments to have a covenant. They also protect to make sure that no out there houses and everything looks cohesive and works together. So it might be that every house has a specific shade of colour bond, perhaps. There are a few different sort of covenants. It's also the sizes of houses, so no one builds a house that covers the entire lot and the house goes to the boundaries and it will be encroaching on others' land and that kind of stuff. They're very important documents and they protect you, and they also protect your neighbours. So you don't have a neighbour perhaps that's right on the boundary or something like that. Another important thing to look for is the rates and the outgoings of the property. So rates on properties obviously is a regular outgoing you need to pay, and you need to pay while you own the property. So we can actually tell you what the rates are at the time. If you're buying a property off a subdivision, it's very hard to know what the rates are, but we can provide you with a rough estimate. This is because the property won't be separately rated yet because it's still part of a larger lot. And finally, connected services. So it's important to know what services are connected to a land. So for example, here in Nagambie, where I am now, we don't have a gas connection, so everyone has bottled gas. Some properties don't have electricity connected if it's a rural property perhaps, water connection as well, and sewerage connection. So you may learn that a property has sewage system and a septic tank, which needs to be maintained consistently. So they're important things to also understand in terms of your future outgoings, as well as if you want to develop the land more or attach something along those lines. Now, if you are buying a house, there are a couple other things you should look out for, and that should be if there's any building permits. So if you walk into a house and you think, wow, this looks new, it looks amazing, you should have a look to see if there's any building permits, and this should be contained in the vendor statement. A vendor statement will include it. It'll also include insurance. So if there aren't building permits and the property was constructed in the last 7 years, there's going to be issues with council potentially in the future. And if you purchase the property and become the registered owner, you may assume those liabilities that a property was constructed without a building permit. Another one is swimming pools. So there's some very strict laws in Victoria, which a lot of people are already aware of swimming pools, and making sure fences are the correct height. So that's another one we recommend you look out for. You can get information online as to what heights and regulations there are per council, but there also needs to be permits for those. And now finally, concessions and benefits, which is probably the most interesting to a lot of you. So obviously there's the first home owners grant. This is a great incentive by the government. It's either $10,000 if you're in a metro area or $20,000 if you're in a rural area. It is just cash put into your bank account normally, but often it's applied straight to your mortgage. So it's a scheme to help people buy their first home, but it's only available when you are buying land to build a house on. You're buying an off-the-plan property, which means you are buying the land with the house being constructed but not a separate building contract, or a newly constructed home. A newly constructed home is a little bit different because obviously it's already built and ready, turnkey as they call it. However, it's been sold for the first time is the requirement, and it also has to be under 5 years old. So it's potential that the developer built the property, has leased it for 4 years, but is now selling it. You are still entitled to the first homeowners grant. If a developer built the property and then sold it, and then you were the second person to buy it, you don't qualify. And again, if a developer constructed the home, they used it for 6 years and then sold it, you wouldn't qualify because there's that 5-year time limit. Now, there are a fair few requirements for the first homeowners grant that everyone should be aware of. So the first is the property must be purchased for under $750,000. So this is pretty easy if it's a new home or if it's a off-the-plan purchase, because everything's included in one price. If you are buying vacant residential land or an off-the-plan property, just land itself, then this is a bit harder because you'll need to calculate what your cost of your land is, as well as what the cost of your house is, and combine them together, and that's the total. So you want to make sure that doesn't go over $750,000 or you do not qualify. The second is you must live in the home for 12 months. So again, if this is an off-the-plan purchase, so a dwelling that's potentially partially constructed when you buy it, or if it is a new home, so built within the last 5 years, once you settle on that property, you must live in it for the next 12 months. If you decide to go overseas, you may need to pay back the first homeowners grant. Again, if you decide to rent out the property, you will have to pay back the first homeowners grant. So that's a very important requirement that you do live there. You can't live there part-time, so it must be your principal place of residence. So you can't occasionally go and stay at mum and dad's for 6 months and not live there. You actually need to live there. And again, if you do not occupy it as your principal place of residence, you will have to pay it back. Another requirement is that you must never have had the first homeowners grant before, which almost goes without saying. So first homer, you must have never had it before, and that is both in Victoria or any other state. Also, if you have a partner who is not on title, so potentially a husband who has claimed it before, then you are also not entitled, and you need to disclose that when doing your forms. And you must never, I think we just went over that, you must never have applied for the grant before. With first homeowners grants, the bank will normally apply on your behalf if you do have a bank, or your mortgage broker, and this is because they like to take the money instantly, and it often forms part of your deposit. If you don't have a bank involved, then you can apply yourself on the State Revenue Office website, and we can help you with that application. And the next one is the stamp duty concession or exemption for first home owners. So again, this is on top of the $20,000 or $10,000 you can receive for the first homeowners grant. And in fact, if you get one, you normally qualify for the other, and there's a number allocated to you called a UIN, which is used for the exemption or concession as well. So if you purchase a home for under $600,000 or land for under $600,000, you will be exempt from paying stamp duty, which is a really good thing at settlement because, again, as I mentioned earlier, that's one of the things you don't have to pay on settlement day. And if you purchase a home for between $601,000 and $750,000, you will be entitled to a concession. The concession is calculated on a case-by-case basis. There is a great calculator on the State Revenue Office website, and we recommend you hop on that and do some calculations to figure out what your stamp duty may be. You must have all the same requirements as if you were applying for the first homeowners grant. So again, that's why they're so linked. So obviously there's the purchase price restrictions. You must occupy it as your principal place of residence, and you must live in the house for 12 months. And you must never have had the exemption or concession before. Should you be buying land and get the exemption or concession, once a certificate of occupancy is issued for the property, and it must be issued within 12 months of settlement date, you then have to occupy the property for 12 months. So that 12-month limit still applies. If you think, I may not be in the property in that time, or you think that you're not sure if you'll live in it for the first 12 months, down the track you can actually apply for a refund. So it may be more appropriate that you pay for it at the time and get a refund later on. It's very easy to do. It does take 6 to 8 weeks to get back. But like I said, it's very easy to complete, and perhaps if you never want to have to pay that amount back, it's better to pay it in the first instance and get it back at a later date. And the final plan concession is the off-the-plan concession. And this is what we spoke about before. So you buy a house, so you buy land with a house on it, but perhaps the house hasn't begun construction yet, or perhaps the house is half constructed. So it's not fully built yet. It's considered off the plan because you're looking at the house on a plan and buying it from there. So you only pay stamp duty on the land and the percentage of the building constructed at the time you you sign the contract, sorry. So let's say you buy a bit of land, a house and land for $500,000 and the land's worth $100,000, and you sign before they start constructing the dwelling. You only pay stamp duty on the $100,000 value of the land. If, let's say, again, you've spent $500,000 on the house and land package, and you've only the frame's up, and that accounts for 20% of the work, you pay for $100,000 on the stamp duty on $100,000 for the land, and 20% of the building costs. This is calculated automatically, so these aren't exact figures, but it gives you an idea of what it works out to be. So it works on when you sign the contract for the house. So the sooner you sign, the better in that respect, because you do get more of a concession. And this concession is available in conjunction with the stamp duty concession and the first homeowners grant. So let's say that you sign a contract for $1 million for house and land together, so an off-the-plan concession for that, but the land's only worth $300,000 and there's only $100,000 worth of construction done, so you've only really signed on $400,000. You can then get the stamp duty exemption or concession from the SRO, even though you may not normally qualify. So it does get a little bit complicated, but there are a few avenues to get a leg up for first homeowners. And we're more than happy to discuss them in our office, or we can go through them with you. There are other exemptions and concessions which apply, so potentially first farm, you're buying your first farm, so for a young farmer which has a house on it, but it's really important that you speak to your solicitor and perhaps even your agent about what you're entitled to. There's been a fair bit floating around since mid last year about the first homeowners and lenders mortgage insurance that was recently introduced and came into effect in January. So there are some additional provisions if you only have a 5% deposit available from the government, but these are quite limited in the people who can get these. You have to have a certain income of less than $200,000. And it also needs to be, there's only a limited number of spots, I think it's about 10,000, so it's also important if you apply for that, you do it soon. But yeah, that's a brief rundown of the concessions and benefits that you can get as a first homeowner, and they really are designed to give purchasers a leg up into what is an already very competitive property market. So that's about all of my spiel. I hope that's made a lot of sense and also just helped you understand better. There are a lot of great free resources on our website, including a diagram of the property purchase and how it works, so each step, and it goes into a little bit more detail. So I recommend you get on our website and download that. I'm also available to take questions. If you click the link for our bio, you can go to our website, and I'm more than happy if you give me a call and we can discuss them a little bit further. And as I said, thank you very much for tuning in. I can see Sammy Russell of A Little Birdie Told Me is watching, who is a wonderful age that we work with. So thank you for tuning in, Sammy. And like I said, if anyone has any questions, please get in contact with me. Thank you. Bye.